This video is brought to you by Patreon supporter Alan. Unlike a lot of first focal plane LPVOs we've taken a look at recently at full bright illumination down here in the basement, we do not have any sort of optical issues coming back. And like we recently saw with the Bushnell 1:4 first focal plane, if we illuminate the door jamb while we're too close to it, we don't really have any sort of reflection bouncing back at you. Another win for second focal plane. Pew pew! Another few things we can already start to talk about with this thing is how much of the scope body we see. It's a little on the average to maybe just a touch more than average. The reticle is going to be completely down to personal preference. For me, having a 1 to 10 second focal plane LPVO with capped turrets and a reticle like this only means that you have to be at maximum magnification to use those drops efficiently, and thus it really limits the capability of the optic. Pew! Pew pew! 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 Now, none of those are necessarily negatives. They're just observations that I'm making to let you know what the situation is. As far as the reticle, you were taking a look at the ATMR4 reticle in MOA. There's a lot going on, and it could be simplified a touch more to make it a little bit more appealing to myself, but again, this is just the way it is, and thus we're going to evaluate it on that by itself. I like the fact that it's got the ranging reticle down at the bottom at 6 o'clock. It's out of the way. It's really not that noticeable, so it's not drawing attention away from your eye or the center where you'd actually be using this thing. Because this is second focal plane, that means as we increase the magnification, the reticle does not change size. So keep that in mind. But what that also means is, like what I mentioned earlier, if you want to have those drops line up to potentially what your cartridge is on your rifle, you have to be at the maximum magnification of 10x to use it. And that really limits it because being a 10x is going to be challenging in most situations. Illumination is not half bad, but similar to what we saw with the Zeiss LPVO from many years ago, I think it's a little bit too over-illuminated. Not as far as brightness goes, but just what they decided to illuminate. Because if you look at it real quick, it's kind of hard to pick up where dead center is. And that's a mark against it. If it wasn't for the fact that the click on this thing was so audible, you'd have no idea that you were really changing it. Despite how good it sounds, it feels really, really muted, kind of like there's nothing there. It's very odd. This is an MOA scope, so it's not going to line up 100% with the target, but we'll at least be able to see where she lines up at 10 mils, which is about 35 MOA, so it's not 100%, but again, with this, you're going to set it and forget it. We do have the top part of the image starting to blur out there, so hopefully you never have to worry about going that far out. See if she'll return to 0. And it's, yep, that's there. Pretty good. Plenty of adjustability on the windage. The image down here looks very good. I did have to tweak the focuses a little bit, but it looks actually stellar considering this thing's got a 100-yard fixed parallax. It looks like we might have dropped. All right, we got a little bit of play in the windage. Almost 2 clicks. Watch it. I'm going to line it up with the first line right there. I'm going to go back. 1, 2, 3. So we got, that's loaded to one side. So we got a little bit of play to the windage itself. Let's see if we have that with the elevation.
No, but you can see that it has a little bit of a shift there. It's not a lot, but it's noticeable. If we can pick it up down here, you're absolutely going to be picking it up after a few thousand rounds of any sort of caliber you throw through this thing. So, not the best performance.
On the topic of caliber, Athlon claims that this reticle is set up for 68 or 69 grain projectiles of either 223 or 556, but it doesn't mention anything about velocity, barrel length, or the like. So as far as where these drops are going to line up for your rifle and cartridge, that's something you're going to have to really explore with. But if you don't like the vagueness of that, there are other options which we will be exploring as this video progresses. Before I lose the opportunity, one great thing about this thing is the 1X. It's actually very flat and doesn't have a lot of fisheye. You can see how well the power lines line up inside and outside the optic. It's actually surprisingly good, and most of that's due to the fact, guess what? It's a second focal plane optic. Illumination again here on full is daytime visible clearly. However, this is still early morning sun, not middle of the day, super bright sun. So we'll be exploring that a little bit more in the video. But if you're looking to make contrast on dark targets or in hard to read areas, you have no problem picking this reticle up with the illumination on in those environments. Despite the fact we're here at 30 yards, the image still looks pretty good up to 5x, but once we crest over that, of course it's going to get blurry. This is a very close distance to be using maximum magnification without a side focus. So what were you really expecting? But it's still nice to be able to compare this to other optics in case something like that is, a worry for you as far as how well it's going to function inside of these distances. But this thing is going to be much more tailored for farther ranges. So at 400 yards, how is it going to look? Well, here at about 5x, we have again a very nice sharp looking image. Edge-to-edge sharpness is great, colors are pretty good, and contrast is pretty good despite the fact that all those trees in the background are all dead and brown and gray and really just sort of nasty looking. But the real test for any optic, at least in my opinion, is being able to pick up all these light colored bricks on the side of this little building. It's a great consistent way to test glass resolution over many different optics. And here, this thing does not disappoint. Look how good this image looks. It's stellar. You can pick up almost all the bricks over there. There's almost no chromatic aberration, a little bit in some spots, but honestly you have to really be looking for it. Illumination here is enough to create a little bit of contrast. I play around with the camera settings to see if we can get a little bit more out of it, but ultimately, it's good no matter how you cut it. So, very impressive considering the price. Being sub $500, it's so far seeming like a lot of optics for the money. But let me make that live for you a little bit. On the left we have this, and on the right we have the Gen 3 Razor HD. Now, very clearly, there's a couple of differences that you can pick up right away. One is definitely how much of the scope body you see and how much of the field of view we have through the Razor as opposed to this. But look how much more distortion there is on the Razor. The lines just pull every which way. Nothing lines up, and it's a little disorienting, especially if you get behind this. As far as the overall clarity though, it still goes to the Athlon. I love how the Gen 2 Razors look, the 1:6s, as far as how much scope body you have versus the image, but here on the Gen 3 it sucks. The Swamp Fox, on the other hand, is very, very similar to how this Athlon performs. You have very good image quality on both, about the same amount of scope body between the two, different reticles, but these are two totally different functioning LPVOs. In fact, the Swamp Fox is much more of an MPVO, but as far as the image flatness and clarity, at 1x, they're very, very close to one another. So, and keep in mind, these are really close as far as price. The Gen 3 Razor is more than 4 times the price of this Athlon. And you're going to be like, well, how much of a difference does it really make? Well, take a look at our 400-yard brick building here. On the right with the Gen 3 Razor, we already have that at its maximum of 10x. Slowly going to start ramping up the Athlon. But you'll just note the image quality is just not there with the Razor. Seriously, just look at these two side by side and tell me which one looks better, which one looks more expensive. The Razor just never impressed me whatsoever. The illumination was great, but only if you were right behind it. The reticles between these two are ironically very similar, wouldn't you say? I think the Athlon tried to mimic the Gen 3 Razor reticle as close as possible without, copyright infringement. As far as the Swamp Fox versus this, the only reason why the Swamp Fox video might not look as clear is because it was very cold outside and very warm in my apartment, and we have a lot of turbulent airflow. But as far as overall clarity and sharpness goes between these two, they are much closer than they are farther apart. And if you're really going between these two, it's going to be completely down to personal preference on what you're looking for. But more on that later. This is just a very brief interjection of how this Athlon compares to some of its competitors. Getting back into it though, here at 800 yards, you can see a little bit of the chromatic aberration creeping up in the 30-yard power lines. At 10x, that's going to be okay. Again, it's not terrible, but it is something that you will notice if you're looking for it. Other than that, the image quality at 800 yards is sensational. Now keep in mind, this is a 34mm tube optic with a 28mm front objective, so you would think that it's going to let in a lot of light, and during the daytime hours it does let in a lot of light. But here in the failing light, it's clearly dusk, the sun's gone, and ambient light matches what I was able to capture as close as I possibly could. But here at 10x, it is a little bit darker at full zoom, which you'd have to be to use the drops again, at 400 yards, than it would be ambient or with a more expensive optic with higher quality HD glass. However, we still have enough resolution, sharpness, and clarity on this thing to be able to make a decent observation on that 400-yard parapet wall and, be able to take a fairly accurate and precise hit. The image so far has seemingly been really good up to about 800 yards, but here at 1,000 you can clearly see that the sharpness and resolution is definitely starting to fall off. We can still make out a lot of the shapes and a lot of what we're looking at, but it's not something that I'd want to take a very precise long-distance shot at. But guess what? It's an LPVO. It's not designed for that anyway. If you're shooting at steel in the desert or even rocks, it's going to be more than adequate for that. Let me reinforce for you guys just how well the 1X is on this. Look at the berm all the way in the back. Everything lines up. The concrete wall on both sides will line up basically perfect. Again, it's a win for a second focal plane optic. Now, I'm not saying that second focal plane is the best out there. It's the only thing you should ever get. A lot of HPVOs don't suffer from the same sort of problems because the magnification range is not, the magnification range is usually higher, let's say like a 5 to 25, but the magnifier inside is only a 5x magnifier, whereas this is a 10x magnifier. So thus, the glass inside of a 1 to 10 first focal plane a la Razor HD Gen 3 has to work basically twice as hard as it does in a 5 to 25 HPVO. And keep in mind, HPVOs are usually not under the same sort of size and weight restraints as LPVOs. But despite that, this thing only comes in at a little bit over 18 ounces. It's fairly lightweight, despite the fact it's got really nice sized turrets. Not good turrets, but nice sized turrets. And it's got a 34mm tube. So it's a really good balance of everything. Here at 50 yards at 10x, we're going to see some chromatic aberration coming in. Again, you're not really going to be using this thing in this environment all the time, but if you do, you can clearly make out 22 LR holes at 50 yards. So again, another tick up for the glass. Another nice benefit to a second focal plane LPVO with bright illumination is, guess what? You can see the reticle when you're way off into the shadows, which is something I really like because it helps draw my eye towards the center. Any first focal plane LPVO, usually the second you go off axis from seeing the illumination, it completely dies out. Or if you can't see through it, you're not going to see the illumination, which can be a bummer sometimes. As far as the eye box goes, here at 1X, it's at least average, if not a touch average, which is impressive, again, despite the fact this thing's a 1 to 10. Here at 4X, it's mostly average, and as we slowly increase the magnification going all the way to its maximum, it's going to remain about average to slightly less than the higher we go up. Again, that's just the nature of the beast with any sort of magnified optic. The higher the magnification you go, the harder it's going to be to get behind. That's why I cannot stress enough the importance of a good cheek weld and just proper fundamentals behind any optic. Here at 7X, you're going to have a little bit of a hard time seeing through it if you're trying to do anything dynamic, but at 10X, you better be behind this thing 100% squared away all the time. But again, if you're going to be taking a long distance shot, you're going to be doing that no matter what, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Wrapping this thing up is actually going to be very easy for me. I don't necessarily agree with a 1 to 10 second focal plane capped LPVO. In my opinion, the Swamp Fox is a little bit more versatile simply because you could use it as an MPVO and be able to quickly and accurately dial in your dope for any caliber at any distance at any magnification. This thing really restricts you from having to be at its maximum magnification to use the drops, and you have to be using sort of the right weight ammo with the right barrel in the right velocity at the right sort of atmospheric conditions to have it mostly line up with this reticle. So it might not be perfect for everybody. The Swamp Fox definitely gives you a much more dynamic approach towards things, but you might not be looking for that. If you're looking for exactly what this optic offers, then it's an absolute no-brainer. It's a home run. For under $500, you're getting excellent glass with good illumination on the reticle. You're getting a good reticle. You're getting a really good feel, fit, and finish with the exception of the turrets. The turrets are very mushy, but again, you're going to set it and forget it. As far as longevity, I can't really say much about it. I haven't torture tested this thing or ran thousands of rounds of ammo through it, but apparently Athlon's warranty is very good. So if it does break, you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. As long as this is what you're looking for, just get it. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I was blown away by the overall experience of using this thing for the price point. Again, it's not something that I would personally buy for myself, but if it fits what you're looking for, and this is going to excite you, then just get it. If not, there are other options, which I'm going to roll in right now. Now, if you're cross-referencing this Athlon and a Gen 3 Razor HD 1-10, I don't think anyone here is going to be doing, but if you're going to be willing to spend $2,000 on an optic, you're probably going to be looking in the Night Force area for an attacker for around $2,500 or so. So this doesn't really quantifiably add up. But if you think that a Gen 3 Razor is going to be 4 times the cost as far as the overall fit, finish, and functionality of this Athlon, you'd be wrong. I think ultimately this Athlon outperforms the Razor HD in all of its general purpose functions, with the exception of the overall brightness of the illumination. Yes, the Razor is built to a much higher standard as far as fit, finish, and overall qualitative feel, but the level of glass clarity just absolutely sucks, especially for $2,500 or $2,000. You can get the American-made ones, but I don't really have any experience with that, so I don't want to give you any sort of false advertising on it, but I wouldn't be overly optimistic. Instead, you're going to be probably cross-referencing or cross-shopping this thing with the Swamp Fox 1-10. And again, these are two totally different optics. The Swamp Fox functions much more as an MPVO and gives you the flexibility of having exposed locking target turrets and different reticle options to really fine-tune it for a more precise sort of optic. And in that regard, it's much more of an MPVO than it is an LPVO. But if you're looking for something just quick, simple, easy, just screw it, I got to dial it up to 10 to make a more precise shot at distance, the Athlon is a very good choice in my opinion. Again, as long as it's A, what you're looking for, B, within your budget, and C, hopefully going to hold up to whatever caliber you're going to be shooting through it. With the comparisons out of the way, let's focus a little bit more on just the image quality here before I just wrap this thing up and call this video good. We're already 18 plus minutes into this thing, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk. At 190 yard berm, we still have a very good image. We see a little bit of chromatic aberration peeking in, but really not that much. Keep in mind, it is very bright and sunny, and we still have excellent sharpness, basically edge to edge. Yeah, it might not be perfect in some spots, but setting up a camera behind an optic is more of an art than it is a science. You really got to sort of feel things out. But nevertheless, we still have a very good image. Focusing our attention on the 200 yard paper, real quick, we get the exact same sort of performance we've been seeing throughout this entire thing. Touch of chromatic aberration all the way to the far left in the high contrast areas with the bullseye on paper, but you can easily make out where the X ring and the 10 ring differentiate on paper. Now, don't get me wrong, you're not going to win any F-class competitions with this thing, but again, it's an LPVO. It's not designed for that. The only real thing I haven't really touched base on is when I actually use this thing, and using it was fine. Getting behind it, no issues whatsoever. The reticle is easy to pick up at any sort of magnification. It doesn't seem too big or too cluttered at 1x, and it's got a fairly forgiving eye box, and it's just excellent. That's it. This is an excellent LPVO. Alan, thank you so much for sending this in for review. I had a great time filming this, as I do with all of my optics that I do, and get the chance to really spend some time with and get to understand. So Alan, thank you very much for sending this in. And thank you all very much for watching. It's really nice to see that despite the fact YouTube is sucking with the algorithm, I still have a couple thousand views on almost all of my videos after I release them. So, truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And of course, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can help by using the affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.